If you think the Malfoy family's crimes started with Lucius being a Death Eater, you better take a seat, because their criminal record is longer than you might think. Hey there, wizards! How's it going? The name Malfoy comes from Old French and means bad faith. A pretty fitting meaning for a family like theirs. The origin of the name is also important for understanding the family's origins, because the Malfoys weren't always established in Great Britain. The first member of the Malfoy family who founded the line that settled in Wiltshire, England, was Armand Malfoy. Like many ancestors of English noble families, Armand arrived in Great Britain as part of William the Conqueror's army. William I was the Duke of Normandy, and after long battles to establish his rule over the French region, he and his army invaded England, where his cousin Edward the Confessor was king. On his deathbed, Edward named someone else as his successor, Harold II. This did not please William at all, because he was one of the strong candidates for the throne. William I argued that the late king had previously promised him the throne and that Harold had sworn to support his claim. However, that did not happen. So, William and his great fleet invaded England, defeated and killed Harold at the Battle of Hastings.
And you might wonder, but what do the Muggle conflicts and invasions have to do with the Malfoy family, who despised Muggles and never associated with them in any way?
The Malfoys have always had the reputation, as suggested by their rather unflattering name, of being a slippery bunch,
and that they were always in search of power and wealth wherever they could find it, whether among wizards or Muggles.
Armand Malfoy, as part of the invading army, performed shady, mysterious services for King William I. Whether the Muggle king knew he was a wizard remains a mystery.
But these special, shady services were certainly criminal, and this earned Armand Malfoy several rewards, such as the local lands that were confiscated, where Malfoy Manor was built, housing generations of the family for almost 10 centuries.
So here, with the first member of the Malfoy family who started the lineage in England, we already have strong indications that he committed several crimes in service of the king.
Land seizures, murders, who knows what else this guy did in the name of the king. And then we move on to the 14th century, when the world was almost devastated by the Black Plague, a disease that killed about 40% of the world's population. That's a lot of people. And maybe you're wondering, there's no way Malfoy caused the Black Plague. No, he didn't.
But Nicholas Malfoy benefited greatly from this pandemic.
He murdered Muggles who lived in the area around Malfoy Manor and annexed those lands to the family's domain. And these murders were disguised as if those people had the Black Plague. Nicholas Malfoy was never punished.
He escaped the censure of the Wizards' Council, which was the governing body that preceded the Ministry of Magic, and never paid for anything he did. So you can add murder and illegal land seizure to his record. Despite the Malfoy family's defense of pureblood values and their undeniably genuine belief that wizards were superior to Muggles, the Malfoys never stopped flattering the non-magical community when it was convenient for them.
And the result is that they are one of the richest wizarding families in Great Britain.
And for many years, there have been rumors that over the centuries, the family has successfully traded Muggle money and goods. Over hundreds of years, they managed to expand their estates in the lands of Wiltshire, annexing the neighboring Muggle lands. And the favor they gained with royalty brought them treasures, such as Muggle works of art, and an ever-growing collection. Historically, the Malfoys made a clear distinction between poor Muggles and the rich and powerful. They did not mingle with the poor, but if the Muggles had money, power, and were part of the high social circle, then there was no problem for them to socialize with those people. So, until the imposition of the International Statute of Secrecy, which happened in 1962, the Malfoy family was active in Muggle social circles. And this fervent opposition to the statute was precisely because they would have to withdraw from this pleasant sphere of social life.
In fact, the Malfoys' relationship with Muggles was not limited to business alone.
Because there is ample evidence that the first Lucius Malfoy, who lived there in the 16th century, was an unsuccessful suitor, of course, for the hand of Queen Elizabeth I, who rejected him. Elizabeth I never married.
In fact, she became known as the Virgin Queen.
And according to some wizard historians, she never married because when Lucius Malfoy I was rejected by her, he cast a curse, causing her to deny and refuse all marriage proposals that came afterward. Another crime for the Malfoy record, cursing muggles is against the law. As soon as the International Statute of Secrecy and Magic was enacted, and wizards began to live in hiding, the Malfoys immediately cut ties with muggles, no matter how noble or wealthy they were, and they understood that any opposition to the Statute of Secrecy would only distance them from the new center of power in the wizarding world, which was the newly created Ministry of Magic.
They suddenly became as supportive of the statute as any of those who had backed it from the beginning.
And they obviously began to deny that they had any contact with any muggle, whether through business, marriage, or any kind of relationship. Since the Malfoys were very wealthy, they had a lot of money, and this wealth gave them a certain influence in the Ministry of Magic, which honestly was problematic from the start. So, for generations, the Malfoy family's money influenced some things in the ministry, although no Malfoy ever aspired to become Minister of Magic, because they operated behind the scenes. It's often said that you'll never find any of the Malfoys at the crime scene, although their fingerprints can be found all over the wand used in the crime. They were independently wealthy, with no need to work for a living, and generally preferred that position of power behind the scenes.
They were content to let others do the dirty work and take the blame for failure if it happened.
The Malfoys helped finance the campaigns of many of their preferred candidates, that is, those who defended their particular interests. And that included paying for dirty services, like cursing members of the opposition. Wow, their record is getting pretty long, isn't it? Add to the list coercion and bribery.
In the 18th century, the Malfoy family's behind-the-scenes influence at the Ministry of Magic grew stronger, and the year was 1789, and the elected minister was Unctuous Osbert, and he served 2 terms, but he was merely a puppet of a wizard named Septimus Malfoy.
He was the real boss of things there, and Osbert governed completely based on Septimus's interests. Obviously, Osbert's term was completely focused on favoring pureblood families. Although manipulating a ruler to serve your own interest isn't exactly a crime, as long as it doesn't involve corruption or anything like that, it's quite immoral.
Even more so when those interests harm a segment of the population that is completely vulnerable.
And that's if we rule out the possibility that Osbert is under the effect of the Imperius Curse. Because we don't know if it happened, but coming from the Malfoys, I don't think we can doubt it. The Malfoy family took advantage of a corrupt system. They were always where they could wield the most power. And when things didn't go the way they wanted, they would simply find a way to buy people off, cheat the system, and manipulate. And that happened again in 1962.
When, for the first time since the Ministry of Magic was established, a Muggle-born took office as Minister of Magic.
Look at this. Look at how this case shows us that the wizarding world has problems. Problems very similar to what Muggles face, right? When it comes to prejudice and inequality. Because the Ministry of Magic was established back in the 1700s, right after the International Statute of Secrecy, in 1692.
And it was only in 1962 that a Muggle-born Minister for Magic was elected.
And that caused a huge commotion, because several members of the Wizengamot resigned in protest, since it was unacceptable for a Muggle-born to hold the highest position of power and authority in the wizarding world. Not the top authority, since the International Confederation of Wizards ranks above the Ministry of Magic, but for local government, yes, pure prejudice, of course. The problem is that the situation didn't stop with the resignations of people from the Wizengamot. Through a shady scheme, they managed to get Nob Lich to leave his position, removed due to a mysterious illness.
And I'll give you a chocolate frog if you can guess who was behind it. Abraxas Malfoy, Lucius's father, and Draco's grandfather.
Although nothing was ever proven against him, obviously because his family was protected in many ways, he took part in this scheming plot to remove the elected Minister of Magic from power. Add that to his record. Coup against a democratically elected leader. In the 1960s, when the First Wizarding War was just beginning and taking its first steps, obviously Abraxas Malfoy's son honored the family's history by becoming a Death Eater and following Voldemort. During the First War,
Lucius Malfoy was a valuable servant to Voldemort, and while Voldemort's reign of terror lasted, which was about 2 decades, Lucius Malfoy tortured, killed, kidnapped, and blackmailed. But when Voldemort fell, he claimed to have been under the Imperious Curse, and was obviously acquitted of all the charges for the crimes he had committed. As Cornelius Fudge used to say, the Malfoys are a very important family, always making generous donations to important ministry causes. During the period when Voldemort was in exile, Lucius Malfoy kept to himself, living his comfortable and wealthy life, obviously still holding on to all the prejudices and absurdities he believed in, and obviously shaping his son to be just as bad or even worse than he was.
So, in the year 1992, Lucius Malfoy found himself forced to get rid of some objects in his house that could cause him some embarrassments.
Because the Ministry of Magic was conducting raids after evidence that Voldemort had infiltrated Hogwarts through Quirrell, and so everyone who had any connection with Voldemort in the past was being investigated again. Lucius Malfoy plants Tom Riddle's diary in Ginny Weasley's belongings, hoping to achieve 3 things. Get rid of the object that would embarrass him through an innocent little girl, try to get the Chamber of Secrets opened again, and have Muggleborns killed and incriminate the daughter of Arthur Weasley, who was a staunch defender of Muggle rights, and had even created new laws to protect Muggles. So that way, he would kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Because imagine the scandal if it were discovered that the daughter of the very man who made laws to protect Muggles was responsible for the attack on Muggleborns. Anyway, part of Lucius Malfoy's plan worked. He actually managed to plant the diary there. Ginny took it to school. The Chamber of Secrets was reopened, but no Muggleborn student was killed. And to make matters worse, Lucius Malfoy was still a member of the Hogwarts Board of Governors. The Hogwarts Board is responsible for making important decisions for the school.
For example, they are the ones who decide who will be the headmaster or who will stop being the headmaster.
They are between Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic. They are above the headmaster and report to the ministry. And Lucius Malfoy was part of this group of 12 governors, where he threatened the other 11 members of the council to make them sign Dumbledore's removal from Hogwarts because of the attacks that were happening at Hogwarts. In other words, something he caused himself. Anyway, the diary was destroyed. Lucius Malfoy's plans were foiled, but there was no way to prove he was behind it. Just think about it. If during the First War, with all the evidence, he was caught, tried, and acquitted, how would they be able to prove anything now with the diary destroyed, which was the biggest piece of evidence? Anyway, part of the problem was solved. Dumbledore got his position back, and once again the Malfoys got away with it.
During the 1994 Quidditch World Cup, Lucius Malfoy and his fellow Death Eaters found the perfect moment to carry out an attack.
And at the Quidditch World Cup campsite, they simply hoisted the Muggle family who owned the land by their ankles and tossed them into the air. This was a big shock for the magical community in Great Britain, because even though there had been signs of Voldemort trying to return 3 years earlier, the Death Eaters hadn't shown up. They hadn't been active since 1981, so this had a big impact in the media. But of course, no one responsible was caught. When Voldemort finally returns, in June 1995, Lucius Malfoy immediately goes to meet his master when he feels the dark mark burn, and then he resumes his privileged position as Voldemort's first lieutenant. From then on, Lucius continues to serve Lord Voldemort, and one of his tasks was to curse the Ministry of Magic employee, the unspeakable who worked in the Department of Mysteries, called Broderick Bode, so that he would try to retrieve the prophecy.
But Broderick Bode was strongly affected by the protection on the prophecy, which doesn't allow anyone to take it except those to whom the prophecy refers, and this caused him to lose his memory and be hospitalized at St. Mungo's Hospital.
When Broderick Bode was starting to recover his memory and could report who had cursed him, Lucius Malfoy covered his tracks by murdering the wizard and sending it anonymously. It was Devil's Snare, disguised as an ordinary plant and sent as a get-well gift. That way, the wizard was strangled by the plant when no one was watching. That same year, Lucius Malfoy led the invasion of the Ministry of Magic in an attempt to obtain the prophecy, where, through a trap, Harry Potter was lured to the Department of Mysteries, and a battle between Dumbledore's army and the Death Eaters took place, and the Order of the Phoenix arrived as reinforcements, where for the first time, Lucius Malfoy was caught red-handed, and this time, there was no way to escape. The Malfoy family, for the first time, is disgraced before the Wizarding Society, and the truth about them is finally revealed. The disgrace of the Malfoy family wasn't only in the eyes of Wizarding Society, but in Voldemort's as well. Lucius Malfoy and his family fell into complete disrepute, and to punish them, Voldemort appoints Draco Malfoy as one of his Death Eaters and gives him an impossible mission: to kill Dumbledore. When the Ministry of Magic falls and Voldemort takes power, establishing a puppet government, Lucius Malfoy is released from Azkaban, but he no longer holds the position he once had among the Death Eaters, and he is frequently humiliated by Voldemort and the other Death Eaters. Even so, he opened his house as headquarters for the Death Eaters, which also served as a prison for their kidnapped victims. For a brief moment, Lucius Malfoy hoped that he would once again be in Voldemort's good graces when Harry Potter, along with Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, were captured and brought to the Malfoy mansion.
He becomes desperate to call Voldemort immediately, so that they would be the ones to deliver Harry Potter into the hands of the Dark Wizard.
But obviously they don't succeed because a battle breaks out, and they are saved by Dobby, who unfortunately ends up being killed.
During the Battle of Hogwarts, both Lucius Malfoy and Narcissa weren't at all concerned about which side would win. They only wanted to find their son Draco alive.
When it was found that Harry had survived Voldemort's killing curse once again, the battle resumed, but Lucius Malfoy didn't even raise his wand to fight.
He and his wife leave in the middle of the battle looking for their son.
And when Voldemort is defeated, they don't care. They just sit at the table with everyone's eyes on them, holding each other. And after all that, after Voldemort's final defeat, Lucius Malfoy was arrested, right?
No, he wasn't arrested because Lucius Malfoy made a plea bargain, turning in and identifying other Death Eaters.
And they also took into account the help that Narcissa Malfoy gave to Harry when she lied to Voldemort, saying he was dead after being attacked in the forest. That was considered a great help in finally defeating Voldemort. So, let's add that to the list. Wow, once Lucius is on the list, it gets a lot longer, right? Bribery, coercion, torture, murder, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment. And even so, he got away with it.
In my opinion, no plea bargain should have gotten Lucius Malfoy out of jail. He should have gotten life in prison.
Because he didn't change his views at all about blood purity, the ideology of purity. He didn't change at all. And we can't forget about Lucius Malfoy's offspring either, right?
Draco, who despite completely failing in all his attempts to be a Death Eater, also contributed to the increase in crimes on the family's record. Even though he didn't manage to kill Dumbledore, he almost killed Kate Abel and Ron Weasley. And besides that, he allowed Death Eaters to enter Hogwarts.
So we can add attempted murder and premeditated murder, right? Because it was planned. It wasn't an accident.
Conspiracy, criminal association, and facilitation of crime, since he orchestrated the entry of the Death Eaters. Honestly, what a family, right? What an example. A real model family. What a family. So concerned about raising wizard children, right?
There's a line from Lucius Malfoy where he says, "My only concern was the safety of this school."
And the children, the Muggleborns. But that's really shameless, right? Anyway, those were some of the crimes we know about from the Malfoy family, right? Because we don't know about some of those who lived in Normandy. And there are only a few known names over 10 centuries. Yeah, what a family. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Comment, leave a like if you enjoyed it, and share. All the information in this episode is official, and it comes from the Malfoy family text, as well as some other small excerpts, like notes from the book The Tales of Beedle the Bard. And it's all very easy to check. You can check it yourself in J.K. Rowling's archives on the Harry Potter website, and read the text, where it talks a little about these guys.
Obviously, a lot of information here also comes from the books themselves, so if you haven't read them, do it. You can only benefit from it. Thanks. See you in the next episode, and until then, mischief managed.